This afternoon, we'll have the privilege of hearing from three presenters. To begin, Dr. William Damon, Professor of Education at Stanford. He will be followed by Dr. David Matthews, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, and Dr. Stacy Molnar-Main, Research Deputy with the Kettering Foundation. I'd like to just read a brief introduction for our first presenter, Dr. Bill Damon. Dr. William Damon is a professor of education at Stanford University, director of the Stanford Center on Adolescence, and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. He has authored numerous books, including Failing Liberty 101, a 2011 publication. Dr. Damon is married to Ann Colby, who is his frequent collaborator on research and writing in human development. He and Ann have 3 children and 1 grandchild. Would you please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Dr. Bill Damon.
Sure. Thank you very much for that nice introduction, and thank you for hospitality. I want to thank Paul for making all of the arrangements, and it's just wonderful to be here in this very beautiful spot. I love this building, among other things, but the whole campus just shines, especially on a day like today, so it's very uplifting to be here, and I want to thank you for that. So today I'm going to speak about, let me see, I'm supposed to touch B, I think. Yeah, there it is. I'm going to speak about a very particular part of civic education, which has to do with motivating young people to actually do something, to participate, to be active citizens. There are lots of things that we need to educate students for, obviously, and they certainly need to have the knowledge, and they need to have a sense of history and a lot of skills. But the motivation, I think, sometimes gets left off the table in our educational pursuits, maybe partly because we don't know a lot about how to do it or what's really involved. So that's what I want to talk about today, is what inspires young people, what moves them to actually get involved as citizens. And at Stanford, in my center, the Center on Adolescence, we have focused on the idea of purpose. We've looked at purpose and studied purpose in a number of areas for about 10 years now. And we believe that purpose in life is one of the great developmental achievements that helps people keep going. It helps them form their goals. It helps them with sticking with those goals, with being resilient during the inevitable ups and downs in life. And it gives you a sense that you're engaged in something beyond the self, something larger than yourself that is important on more than just a personal scale. So I want to begin just by giving you the definition of purpose that we use and that I think has now become increasingly accepted definition in the developmental sciences. And the important parts of this is that it's an intention that is stable. It's not a temporary one-day thing like, oh, tomorrow I'm hoping I'll find a parking place at BYU or get a good grade on the exam tomorrow or something like that. It's a long-term goal, and it's an attempt to accomplish something that is meaningful to you as an individual. In other words, nobody can tell you your purpose is to do this or do that, and you say, oh, okay, I guess I got to do it. You have to own it. You have to really care about it. But in addition, that's not all. It has to be of consequence to something beyond the self. So there are lots of meaningful things in life that are fine and important to do. You may want to learn Greek or read poetry because you enjoy it, or or do anything that you find fun and meaningful, and all that's fine. I find golf meaningful, by the way, but that's not a purpose. That's something I enjoy doing. But the things that I do and that other people do that also are intended to leave a mark on the world, to do something beyond the self, whether it be something altruistic for other people or something having to do with creating a new art or a scientific achievement, but something that brings you beyond your own personal enjoyment or sense of personal well-being. It has to be, purpose is both. And we, as I said, look at purpose all across all of the different engagements in life, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are. But for the present talk that I'm giving now and the concern that all of us share about citizenship, we are concerned with civic purpose. And I'm going to talk really mostly this afternoon about what that means, what civic purpose means. But to say a little bit more about purpose, when we did a study in general of purpose, and this is purpose all across all of the domains of life. I'll talk about what those domains are in a minute. But just the point of this one graph, or this one data slide, is that among young people ages 12 to 22, only about a fifth of them, about 20%, are clearly purposeful in the sense that they know what they want to do with their futures and why they want to do it. And that's nothing surprising. I mean, this is an early point in life, and this isn't meant to be an alarming slide at all, but it's just meant to say that purpose is really a relatively late achieving, it's a late capacity. A late capacity for achievement. Most things develop much more quickly, including even math and English and all the other academic and cognitive skills. But with purpose, you see most of the population, 80%, still either moving towards it or not moving at all. Of course, the distressing quadrant here is the young people who are both low in activity and low in aspiration, meaning that they aren't doing much and they don't have many dreams or many hopes. And that's almost a quarter of the population, and we're concerned about these kids. But most of the population is in one way or another moving towards purpose, and between the ages of 22 and 30, they gravitate more and more towards becoming fully purposeful. Not all of them, and even by age 30, we find about half the population of young people, rather than at age 22, about 20%. So that's sort of the status of purpose in general, finding a sense of direction in life. And where do young people find purpose? Oh, well, actually, let me just give you, before I get to that, let me just give you a couple of quick glimpses into what kids say about purpose. So this is a 17-year-old boy that was very articulate about not having purpose. And he said, well, you know, apathy is just fine. I'm having a great time, just being lazy. His sentiments are not particularly atypical for this group, but he's especially charming and articulate about it. The only thing I'll say is that in that, and he's representative of the quadrant that was about 24% of the population, in that quadrant are not only young people like him who are perfectly benignly okay with not having purpose, it also includes young people who are quite distressed about it and who say, oh, gee, you know, I have nothing to live for, or they're cynical, or there's a whole spectrum of ways of not having purpose. But this is just what one person sounds like. I don't have any goals for my future. What's the big deal about that? It would be fun to travel, especially if I could get someone to pay for it. This is what it looks like for a young person to simply not have goals. Now, we have some kids that have a lot of dreams, but they don't have a lot of activity, and so they're not fully purposeful, but maybe they're moving. This is a girl from our own area, the Bay Area, and she has a lot of idealistic ideas. it's not clear exactly what they are, but she wants to become more connected to this is an environmental statement, I think, and she's very sincere about nonviolence, but she has never done one single thing to prepare to do anything to contribute to this and so on. Hopefully that will be in her future. So we kind of call these kids the dreamers. Then there's kids that are highly active who don't seem to have a lot of meaning in what they're doing, at least yet. So here's a really very fine young man from Tennessee who actually worked very hard. He got into this intelligence outfit. He's just about to begin. But why does he want to do it? Well, it's got prestige. It's a real good job. Other parts of the interview, he talks about this great-looking uniform that he can impress his girlfriend with. Again, a lot of these young people like to travel. And you can predict that if he doesn't find, and again, he's a good kid. These kids are really good kids, and they do what they're supposed to do. And he's worked hard to get into this program. But you can predict that if he doesn't find a deeper reason for dedicating himself to this very dangerous and difficult profession, he's going to burn out at some point. He's not going to sustain what the commitment that it needs to take in order to have a career at this. But again, I think you can predict that he's likely to run into a mentor in the military who tells him what intelligence is for, and that not just in a small way, but it helps protect and preserve a democratic society. It's an important part of our national interest. All of these things, I think he's very likely to discover, hopefully. And again, it's very important that he do discover those. And then here's a fully purposeful young man who wants to be a teacher. And he's thought about it carefully. He knows that it's not just a 9-to-5 job, that he's even thought about how he wants to teach history. In other parts of the interview, he has innovative ideas about how to make history interesting to young people. And you can, again, predict in his case that he really is going to do this. He's going to be committed. He's going to go into this as a profession, and he will have a good run at it. So that's the sort of what it looks like in life, purpose in life at the young ages. Now, what we found, and this is now going to get to the point of my address this afternoon, this is a rank order of where young Americans in that age range that I mentioned, 12 to 22, are finding purpose to the extent that they've found it. This is where the purposeful young kids have found purpose. And interestingly, it's not the majority, but it's a plurality of young people, maybe 35, 40%, something like that, find purpose first and foremost having to do with family issues. They want to have a family, they want to have children, they're dedicated to their current family, and everything revolves around that. They want to have a job because they can support their family. They want to have a nice home and live in a nice community because that's a nice place to raise kids, which they want to do. The only thing I'll note about this that's kind of interesting is that one might think, or I might have expected that this would be more a female thing than a male thing, that most of these kids, but this was actually about equal numbers of girls and boys were in this category of finding purpose in their aspirations to have a family, which I thought was kind of interesting among today's cohort of young people. Vocation is next, and this is, of course, an age-old source of purpose for everyone. It's the idea that your job is a calling. And about a third of the population sees that. I want to be a doctor because I want to cure people, and so on. Faith, we found about 15% of the youth population nationally dedicated first and foremost to serving God. That was their first and foremost purpose in life, and everything that they chose to do was for that superordinate goal. And interestingly, just one word about that, we actually found a survey done in 1922 about religious faith and dedication that found 15% of the American population being totally dedicated to serving God as being their first mission in life. So I don't know what that means, but that 15% figure seemed to be back there in 1922 as well. And this has actually been replicated recently by, I've seen recent data sets that show 13%, 7%, something clustering around this 15% figure. What that means, I don't know, but it's kind of interesting to me. So, and then the other categories you can see, but the point I want to make here, and the reason I'm really showing the slide, is what comes last. What's the last thing in a rank order in this entire menu of sources of purpose? Civic and political leadership. And we found about 1% of the youth population aspiring to being a leader, being president or being a mayor of their town or head of some board or something like that as being their main purpose in life. And I would suggest that's low in a democracy. That's too low. And we weren't doing this a generation ago, but I can tell you from my own memories of high school that there were lots of, especially boys in the class, that really wanted to become president or thought they could be, or, you know, I mean, this was not an uncommon aspiration a generation or two ago. And so this is, I think, something that educators need to confront as an issue, the diminishing interest or dedication in political service and civic service among our youth population, which is one of the primary reasons that I got into this subject as an area to channel our purpose research into the area of civic purpose. Here's just a couple of, I'm just picking one statement out that we got from one interview, but, you know, this is not good. We just had that the other day in history. I forgot what it was. This is American citizenship. It's not very special. I don't find being American citizen very important. These are different kids making these statements, but I don't want to belong to any country. It feels like you're obligated to this country, as if that would be like, you know, it's like, oh my God, I'm obligated? Like, what could be possibly worse than that? It's almost the inverse of the concept of civic virtue, which of course is the idea that we all have an obligation to our civic society. I don't like the whole thing of citizen. I mean, that kind of says it in a nutshell. Now, these are very strong. I obviously selected these statements. These are not typical statements. I picked them out, but they're not bizarre, unique statements either. You know, you get lots of this. So I just want to say a little bit, just a couple of words about. So, what do we do about this, and how does purpose develop, and how could we mobilize ourselves to foster a civic purpose? Well, purpose develops, and I just highlight a couple of the things in this chart. First of all, you have to actually be around or be able to observe adults or people that you respect and admire who are doing purposeful things and having consequences. I mean, and by the way, this is not speculation. These are findings from our data set. So this isn't just my own intuitions. That the purposeful kids had somebody that they could cite as being somebody they admired that was doing something that was of consequence to the world beyond the self. And then the child herself or himself needs to have a couple of revelations, and these are important. One is that there's some deficit in the world, there's some problem, there's some issue, or something needs to be improved. And it could be something very serious and grim, like, gee, my grandfather died of cancer. Somebody should really come up with a cure for cancer or better ways to treat it. That's really important to do. So it could be something like that. Or it could be something more on the level of art. One of our purposeful young people thought that the current music scales were boring. So he's gone to Juilliard, and he really thinks he can invent new music scales that are more interesting and will leave a legacy on the music. So it could be a range of things, but something needs to be done. And then the second revolution is, I can actually do something to make a difference in this area. One revelation without the other doesn't work, but if you put them both together, it's a powerful incentive to develop purpose. And then having a mentor that can encourage you is also essential. But interestingly, the mentors get behind the young person, but don't give them the idea, usually, especially parents. It was very rare when we found a young person that said, yeah, I've got my purpose to be a lawyer because my dad's a lawyer and he's got a great law firm and he told me to be a lawyer. We didn't find many of those cases, but it was important that they observe the father being purposeful, and that the father, whether the kid just wanted to be a chef in a restaurant or whatever, that the father got behind the kid and provided encouragement, or the mother, encouragement, and if resources are necessary, that. So that's purpose in general. And so how to translate that into civic purpose, it's actually a pretty direct translation. Now, this is not coming from data, so these are my speculations, but it seems to me they're, and to some extent, we have a project on civic purpose, and I see plenty of evidence for that, although we haven't analyzed the data enough to say that these are solid, empirically based findings, but I think there's good reason to believe that. That again, just as you need to, in life, observe a purposeful model, kids need to see inspirational examples of civic virtue. So they need to be told the story of the founding fathers, or told the story of people today who are sacrificing for the good of the Union, for the good of the country, for the good of other people. Young people need to be given opportunities to contribute and have the experience of civic participation. And I put the point in about instruction and constitutional concepts because I don't want to leave information and knowledge off the table. That's important too. But right now, to the extent that civics is taught, that's all that's being taught. And what I'm trying to say is these other dimensions that have to do more with character and virtue are also essential. And then the last 3 points I wanted, I drew not from our data set on civic purpose, but from a conference that we gave. And I'm going to wave this here. I left one copy of it with Paul, but if anybody writes to us, we are more than delighted to send copies of the report. We had a consensus conference at Stanford earlier this year, which was, we brought in 7 people from across ideological lines who were dedicated to the idea of civic education, and wanted to see what they would agree on as to what needs to be done in order to foster participatory citizenship in our democracy. And the last 3 points come directly out of the conference. They were things that people agreed on, everyone agreed on, whatever their background, whatever their, this was a highly diverse group, ethnically, ideologically, every other possible way. And by the way, before I get to these last 3 points, we all agreed up front that it's absolutely vital for our nation's future that education pay more attention to civics and to history, the closely aligned field, than it's doing right now. That these subjects have become marginal, and that's almost a frightening prospect for the future of our country, and that everybody every school in the country ought to do much more than it's doing, paying more attention to civic education. So that was just a general statement that everyone agreed on. But the more specific things about how to do it, and this is really the points I want to make here. One point is that, and there was a feeling that these are not being done. So that's that's the interesting thing about the report, is that it wasn't just bland kind of cliches that everyone could agree on. It was actually some things that a lot of people would find a little bit counter conventional at this point. And one is to teach about, in teaching civics, teach about power, because that's what politics is about, is the distribution of power, and who has it, who should have it, how people get it, and how people get it in a democracy, which is different, of course, than how people would get it in a totalitarian society. And what's special about a democracy in the way it distributes or way it makes power available to citizens. And related to that, conflicts of power. The second point is the idea, and we talked about this morning in our smaller group, of developing a positive attachment to the country. And this is going to be a little bit controversial because it brings in the much argued concept of patriotism. But the group did agree, and all of the positions were well represented after a lot of debate and reflection, and it took a lot of civil dialogue among our group. But people did come to the agreement, and if you read in the report, that patriotism is actually a virtue, but not patriotism if defined as a kind of a blind chauvinism of my country first, or my country right or wrong, but patriotism in the sense of a dedication to the American tradition of liberty, and which includes free speech and dissent. And that's part of being, but it means caring about the country and caring enough about it to step outside of your own personal interest and to think about the good of the union and the good of the country and the good of other people as well, and being willing to sacrifice for that. And if you're going to make a sacrifice for something, you really have to care about it. And that's where you need not just a cognitive sense of, well, here's how the society works, but you need an emotional sense that I care about this just like I care about my children, and I would step in front of a bus for my kids. Well, what would you do for your country? And do you care about that enough? And we believe, and I believe, that that's appropriate. That's an appropriate emotional orientation to cultivate in young people. Not just appropriate, but essential. And then finally, the idea of American ideals, and this is something I just want to spend a minute on, because I think it's not the two. Of course, I think we all know that the two core concepts, and what's really special about the United States from its founding, are the concepts of liberty and equality. And yet, these are not well understood by young people, these concepts. We're not born, there's nothing genetic about being born fully understanding these. And if you interview, which I've done, young people about these concepts, you find liberty gets translated as freedom, freedom to do whatever I want kind of thing, which of course kids love that idea. But liberty in a political sense comes with, first of all, a lot of responsibilities, number one. So it's not simply freedom to do whatever you want. It's liberty to follow really your conscience. I mean, that's what the founders said. It's the liberty to say no government or no external body can tell me what is right or wrong, what I believe is right or wrong. And I have a right to my beliefs, and I have a right to pursue them, and in a responsible way, which means a peaceful way and so on, in a civil way, I have a right to profess them to other people, to argue them, to vote for people that I believe are doing the right thing or to express my views. That's what liberty means. And, but it's not freedom to do whatever you want in life. And equality, the same thing. Equality, of course, I mean, nothing surprising about this, but for a young kid, equality is a very concrete sense that everybody has the same thing. But that's not what the founders or what American statesmen have meant by equality. Equality really means equality under the law, equality in the sense of equal rights and equal opportunities, and not equal consequences and equal results. And so these things have to be taught. They're not automatically known by birth, and certainly they have to be developed. It takes a certain amount of intellectual capacity to understand what they mean. And there's one other thing that I want to say about this, which is that the beauty of the American society when it works is that liberty and equality are in a kind of a complementary relationship to one another. And people feel that by pursuing your goals and your conscience, you have an equal chance at both personal success and getting your beliefs implemented. But there is a tension. There's often a tension between liberty and equality. And to some extent, that's an inevitable tension because allowing people to have freedom to pursue things means that things aren't going to always come out equally in the long run. And reciprocally, trying to equalize opportunities and rights sometimes means that you say to people, well, your liberty does not extend this far. You don't have the freedom to do certain things if they're going to deprive people of their equal opportunities. So there is a tension, and as I said, during the successful times in our history, that tension has been constructive. During other times, it's led to fights, and it hasn't been. You're not going to resolve this I mean, we're educators, we're not politicians, and so I'm not trying to resolve this on the level of society, but I'm trying to say that what we have a responsibility to do as educators is to help young people understand this issue, understand this tension, and to be able to resolve it in their own, hopefully, constructive way. So I have one other thing I want to say, and then this is towards the end of my talk. One of the inspirational concepts that we try to work with, that I'm interested in, is the American dream, which is a dream of both equality and liberty. At least it should be. We have a couple of interviews with we've been interviewing kids, and here's what a couple of of our subjects have said about the American dream. It means a lot to a lot of young kids, and by the way, it seems to me to mean a special lot, as far as I can tell from our data, to immigrant kids, which is kind of interesting, first-generation immigrants. So here's a girl that says, it's the chance to pursue your dreams, the daring to be whoever you want to be. I guess it inspires me. I can pursue my dreams, not just accept what's happening. So it's kind of an elevating concept for this girl and for other young people. And here's another one. And this boy was an immigrant, or is an, well, I don't know if it's was or is. Anyway, he says, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, of action. I believe in that. People can be who they want to be. They shouldn't be influenced by the government, influenced by anybody else other than themselves to be themselves. The striking thing to me about this is that these young people seem to be really capturing what the American dream meant originally to the people that I think if I understand it right, the phrase was coined by a historian named James Truslow Adams, who wrote about it as exactly this kind of pursuit of wanting to be who you believe you should be and what your conscience tells you to do. And the material parts of it were important. They had to do with being able to support yourself and aspire to a material status that was, at that time, middle class and well off. But it wasn't the only dimension. And the problem, I think, today is that in the media especially, and maybe even among educators, the American dream has been reduced to, first of all, its material status. And so you get the idea directly that if, for example, if the economic status of people are somehow improving or declining, that's what whether the American dream is still alive hinges on that. It gets reduced to how many BMWs you're able to buy or something like that. And it's a real education in itself. I mean, try Googling the phrase, the dying American dream or the death of the American dream or something like that. You'll get something like 5 million hits, because book after book or article after article has been written with the subtitle or the title, The Myth of the American Dream, The Death of the American Dream, The Diminishing American Dream. And those conclusions, first of all, there are 2 points I make about this, and I write about this in Failing Liberty. One point is that this is on economic grounds alone. Now, economic grounds are not unimportant, but the American dream is much richer than that. But the second point is the economic grounds are all normative. They all have to do with just the average wage and so on of people, and they certainly don't apply to individuals or individual success. And to convey to a young person, an aspiring young person, that basically there's no hope of achievement in this society is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a way of saying to kids, give up before you start. The American dream is still very alive for many individuals who make it, even coming from severely disadvantaged backgrounds. And if there's a economic sense of economic decline, of course we should deal with that, and the population, the average population, is important. And I'm not trying to whitewash that. And it is true that social mobility, that economic mobility has declined in this country, and that's a problem. I don't deny that. But that doesn't mean the American dream is dead. That's what I'm saying. And so if you look at what this boy said, this is kind of an illustration of what I mean, and I'll read this because this is, I think, a lesson for educators that we should not be doing. Last year, the history teacher told us the American dream was dead. I didn't believe that at all. The whole class was just sort of silent, and he could tell that we didn't really agree with that. If we didn't dream, we wouldn't be doing anything. We wouldn't be advancing as a society. And I think this young boy is, kind of a better philosopher than the history teacher. And the history teacher was, I'm sure, being responsible in the sense that he was thinking about all these books and data that pertain to economic mobility and so on. But I think he missed the heart of the matter, which is that this concept and this belief is for American citizenship and for young Americans, whether they're born here or coming here, can be used as a very inspirational concept. And it can and should be part of our national tradition. And people all over the world, by the way, resonate to the American dream. You can go everywhere. You can go to parts of the world that supposedly, and I've done this, I was in the West Bank, traveling around speaking with lots of young Arab people, and they were all talking about the American dream, and yet they had a lot of problems with our government and politics and so on and so forth. So the American dream is resonant all around the world, and in that sense it shouldn't and doesn't just belong to America. And it really is the hope of individual advancement and progress and liberty and the chance that you have to actually define your own life and to pursue your dreams. And I think as an educator, and to get back to my original purpose for this lecture, as an educator, what we really want to do is motivate young people to participate in a constructive way in their society. And we need to use the strengths of the American tradition in order to do that. Thank you very much.